Okay, so before I talk about today's game, I just have one little question. How do you pronounce this? Astyanax? Astyanax?
What was that?
Astyanax.
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 You know, I've stopped questioning the things that happen when I'm here.
You're lucky. You get to leave. So apparently it is pronounced Astyanax.
Okay, so we know how to pronounce it. What the heck is it?
Well, let me explain. Astyanax was originally an arcade game called The Astyanax. It was released in 1989 by Jalico.
Actually, it's pronounced Jalico.
Well, you know what? It was a side-scrolling action platformer taking place in a Greek and Arab mythology hybrid world where you go around beating the ever-loving crap out of enemies, either alone or with a friend. Good old-fashioned monotonous arcade fun. So, how much does the NES version resemble this game? Let's start with the story. The story of the arcade game goes like this. After a long battle against demons, the people of the city trembled in fear, and nobody would stand up to the enemies. Until one day, a man named Rook. You know, if I keep focusing on how to pronounce things, we're gonna be here all day. A man named Roach received a magical axe from God. He goes off seeking the castle of Algerin to destroy the evil overlord Argos. Pretty basic story. Not saying it's bad, it's just a bit generic. Now, you would think this would be an easy plot for them to adapt to the NES. It would, but instead they decided to come up with an original story. And oh, is it a doozy. Astyanax is a 16-year-old student at Greenview High School who has been having a recurring dream in which a young woman is calling out his name.
What?
One day, Astyanax gets sent to another world where he meets a fairy named Cutie. Oh lord. She explains that he is in the kingdom of Remlia and has been summoned to save the princess. Rosebud. Seriously? The princess's name is Rosebud? It's just so stupid! She is being held captive by the evil wizard Blackhorn and his minion named Thorndog. Armed with his legendary axe and accompanied by his new friend Cutie, Astyanax sets out on a journey to Blackhorn's lair in order to rescue Rosebud. Now, in between each world is a cutscene. I'll talk about them more in detail when discussing the presentation, but one thing I wanted to discuss is the dialogue. While it isn't overly plagued with English like a lot of NES titles, it still feels like it was written by a middle schooler. And the text in this game has so many periods, you'd think it was written by a woman.
Joshua!
What? Saying that this story is boring or generic would be a lie. It has absolutely nothing to do with the original, but I have to give them credit for not just using the same plot from the arcade game. But good God, is it silly! While I won't spoil the shocking plot twist towards the end of the game, let me just say that the story begins silly and then just gets a bit strange. And while it might not have been their intention, it had me laughing constantly. Astyanax is a hack and slash game, similar to Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden, going through the levels, killing everything in your path. Now, the levels aren't anything special, and they get repetitive. In fact, some of the levels are literally just earlier levels repeated. Now you have your standard go to the right, jump on the platforms, that kind of level. And then you have the go to the top of the level or go to the bottom of the level. Now, this game does have a few unique features. Instead of just using the same boring axe the entire time, you can pick up a spear and a sword, both of which do more damage. You also have 3 different magic spells. The first being an 8-direction fire projectile, the second stops time, and the third is a lightning bolt that hurts everything on screen, but it takes the most of your magic meter. Speaking of meters, you also have one for your power. The more you attack, the less damage you do, unless you wait for the meter to build up. Now, your attack power increases by gaining power-ups, but the amount of magic each ability uses depends on which weapon you're holding. Oddly enough, the spear uses the least amount. You start out with your basic enemies, skeletons, flying balls of slime, Venus flytraps, and Metroids, but as the game goes on, you fight more recognizable Greek monsters like creatures from the Black Lagoon, whatever the hell that thing is, and the always threatening butterflies. Now, at the end of every level, you fight a boss, and I never get tired of showing this clip.
Joshua loves boss battles.
Sometimes the level will have one boss, and sometimes it's a mini boss, and then you fight the real boss. Some of them are repeated throughout the game, too. Now, of course, you have your standard Greek villains, such as the Medusa, the Griffin, the Minotaur, and Ridley. Then you get bosses that look like something out of Monster Party. I almost expect to walk into a fight and it say, "Please don't pick on me." Also, what the hell is this pig tree demon monstrosity? And what on earth is that?
I think this would be the right time to bring up that Astyanax is very difficult. Again, similar to Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden, it has that lovely standard of you get hit, then you fall down a pit. And with this game's respawning enemies, if you're not a pro at NES games, you'll get frustrated rather quickly. And it makes the game all the more tedious when you have to replay the same level multiple times. There are 0 checkpoints, even when you get to the bosses.
So, to help with the difficulty, we're going to give you all some
Tip for today.
tips. Good grief, it's a running gag.
No, that's a running gag.
First of all, save your magic meter, especially for the bosses. Unless you're crowded with a ton of enemies, which will probably happen.
Also, this is skipping a little bit ahead, but if you get a game over, hold A, B, select, and start to continue where you died. That might sound like a cheat code, but to me, there's a difference between a cheat and something necessary to prevent you from throwing the game out the window.
Overall, the gameplay can be enjoyable, but it all depends on how long you're willing to play what is really the same levels over and over, with very little variety. There is one maze-based level, but it's one of the easiest mazes I've ever gone through. Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden both got this right, giving you a reason to continue. Even if the game is extremely difficult, you want to see what the next level will bring. Astyanax starts to do this, but the motivation of it all is pretty much lost after about 10 minutes. While it isn't the worst game of this genre, it certainly doesn't have the polish of the better ones. Before we discuss the presentation, let's talk about the other cheats in this game.
Sid? Alright. Alright. On the title screen, if you push up, down, left, right, B, 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 start, you'll access the stage select. And if you really just want to plow through this game, push up, 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 down, left, right, up, start for invulnerability. Except for the pits, of course. Now, even though you're invincible, if the boss has an attack similar to your lightning, then it can still hurt you. Whoops.
Here's the thing. When it comes to presentation in an NES game, if the graphics aren't amazing, that doesn't bother me as much. But to me, the music is so important, and it's part of what keeps me playing. So, how well does Astyanax hold up? Well, the music of Astyanax is nice.
It's nothing particularly memorable, but it's nice.
Now, I know I keep referring to it, but let's go back to Castlevania. The first one specifically. These tunes, I think most gamers will recognize, and it's a perfect example of the music being what gives the game part of its driving force. This is where Astyanax falls a bit flat. Not that the tunes aren't enjoyable, they're fine. I just don't get the same motivation from Rimley Castle as I would from something like Vampire Killer. Oh, and even though I said the gameplay got a bit tedious, the level song doesn't change until the 4th stage. Yeah.
The songs for the boss battles, prologue, introduction, title screen, ending screen, again, are nice. They fit with the situations, but nice is really the only way to describe it. You hear it when you play the game, but it's not anything iPod worthy.
Also, each cutscene has its own music. Speaking of which, the cutscenes. Oh, the cutscenes. These are so laughably enjoyable. Whether it be the silly writing, the overuse of the same still images, the fact that Blackhorn is green, or that the emotions of the characters rarely ever match the dialogue.
Like this, for example. Wouldn't you imagine a phrase like, "No!" having a more dramatic picture to go along with it? As for the graphics outside the cutscenes, it's kind of hit and miss. I mean, there's a lot of graphical errors, and even though the level design is kind of bland, the backgrounds are pretty neat. They're bright, they're dark. That's really the only variety outside of the bosses that you get in this game.
Speaking of the bosses though, when you're fighting a major boss, it's just a black screen. Maybe this was to put more emphasis on the monster you're fighting, but I would have liked something. Also, even though I said some of the boss designs are kind of disturbing, that doesn't mean they're not creative. I mean, these are some pretty neat designs, especially for an NES game. If only the actual battles were as creative, though. So, overall, what do we think of Astyanax? Honestly, deciding what the fate of Astyanax was going to be was tough. It's just so average. It's not so good that I think everyone should have it, but it's not so bad that I would advise someone against purchasing it. The gameplay is fun for the first 10-20 minutes, but it becomes repetitive quickly. If you know what you're doing, it should only take you about 45 minutes to an hour. But after I finished it, I didn't have that satisfaction or even that urge to play it again sometime soon. And I think that's the best way to describe Astyanax. You either own it or you don't. It isn't essential, it's just one of those games you take off the shelf, play for a few minutes, and then put it back on the shelf. While the silly story is entertaining, it's only worth going through once every couple years. While this is by no means a terrible game, it's not really a great one. If you see it for less than $10, pick it up and have a little bit of fun. But this isn't one of those NES games that everyone needs to experience. And because of that, Astyanax should stay in the shadows. Let me explain something. Just because a game is good, that doesn't mean it's automatically going to get spotlighted. And vice versa. That's what makes game reviewing, especially retro games, so interesting, and part of what makes what I do so enjoyable. Because sometimes the games that everyone should experience aren't necessarily the best ones. And I have to show you all of that someday. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all next time.